Crowned as the first Tsar of Russia in history, one of the founding fathers and unifiers of the Russian state as a European power, responsible for the conquest of Siberia and other Asian Khanates, creator of the first political police in Russia, even four of Russia is remembered under the shadow of numerous legends that dance between reality and fiction, of a character with psychopathic and compulsive outbreaks that jumped in seconds from euphoria to depression, also known as Ivan the Terrible, marked a before and after in the history of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, and his legacy is still visible in Russia today. And today we are going to know this story full of curiosity speaks Reynaldo Carrillo. This is the new encyclopedia, and you can support our channel simply by liking this video, leaving a comment, sharing it with your acquaintances, and supporting us on Patreon that you can find below in the comments. Ivan IV Vasilievich was born in the residence of Kolomenskoye in the Grand Duchy of Moscow on August 25, 1530. The current Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and other Slavic peoples have their main origin in the Kievan Rus. This was a confederation of Slavic tribes that existed from the 9th century to the 13th century AD until various internal conflicts and the invasion of the Mongols dissolved the federation. One of the small towns in this federation to the north was called Moscow, a town that no one imagined was destined to become the capital of a vast empire. By the end of the 12th century, Moscow became a principality, and through successive ambitious and cunning princes, the principality was gaining strength, gathering land, population, and other resources for itself. Ivan IV, the protagonist of our video, is the grandson of the one known as Ivan the Great. Ivan the Great was the first prince of Moscow who adopted the title of sovereign of all Russia, when he quadrupled the territory of the Principality of Moscow and unified many of the Russian provinces under his reign. He is also the man who proclaimed Moscow as the Third Rome. The son of Ivan the Great, Vasily III of Moscow, father of our protagonist, maintained this consolidation and expansion of the Muscovite Principality. When Ivan IV was only 3 years old, his father Vasily died due to a leg abscess that caused blood poisoning, so the almost baby Ivan was crowned at that age of 3 as the Grand Prince of Moscow. During the father's deathbed, he asked that his son Ivan become the ruler of Russia when he turned 15 years old. Once Vasily died, different boyar clans, which was the name given to the noble landowners, tried to take control of the nation, thus denying Ivan his right to the throne. However, his mother Elena, along with other trusted nobles, took charge of the ruling party and were able to successfully lead Russia for 4 years, until his mother suddenly dies in 1538 under a strong rumor of poisoning, leaving Ivan orphaned at the age of 8. At that age, Ivan showed himself to be a sensitive, intelligent child with a passion for reading, especially on religious and historical topics. However, when his mother dies, he stays isolated. He and his brother Yuri, who was deaf and mute, had been neglected by the nobles who had been left in charge and had been confined in the Moscow palace, almost like beggars going hungry and wearing worn-out clothes, and on more than one occasion receiving verbal humiliations from these boyar nobles. The boyars only considered the little prince when his presence at a ceremony was required. The struggle for power in Russia was increasingly becoming a bloody dispute. Ivan witnessed extremely violent acts from both those who were with him and those who opposed him, and homicides, beatings, and physical abuse were regular. This violent struggle and the humiliating treatment that Ivan received during these years undoubtedly marked his psychology and sowed resentment towards the landowning noble class, which Ivan showed great contempt for all his life, as we will see later. Ivan's political power during his childhood, crowned as prince, was scarce, because the boyars held the government positions. However, he was still the heir to the throne, and as he grew, he was gaining sympathies and loyalties. By 1543, the young Ivan, at 13 years old, suddenly orders the arrest of Duke Andriushchusky, known to be corrupt, and later asks that his body be thrown into an enclosure with a pack of hungry dogs. This act marks a before and after in how Ivan was perceived by the boyars. He began to be more feared and respected, and the government run solely by boyars seemed to be coming to an end. During his life, Ivan was described as intelligent and devout, but also prone to paranoia, rage, and episodic bouts of mental instability that would increase over the years. The truth is that during his adolescence, Ivan studied directly with the Metropolitan of Moscow, Bishop Macarius, and was described as deeply religious a few years before coming to power. Macarius advised the young man to establish a Christian state based on the principles of justice. Likewise, this bishop published a family tree in which it was allegedly demonstrated that Ivan descended from the first Roman Caesars. At 16 years of age, Ivan already excelled in writing and was an avid reader, in addition to being a burly and muscular young man. After a tour with Macario through monasteries and churches in Russia, and after the expansion of the kingdom by his grandfather and father had been consolidated, Ivan is named at 16 years of age as Tsar and Prince of all Russia in the Moscow Cathedral. Thus he was crowned as the first Tsar of all Russia, and his first task was to reform the government. His title of Tsar, which translates as Emperor, was recognized by the international community, where prominent monarchs of Europe respected his distinction. Shortly after being crowned as Tsar, Ivan marries Anastasia Romanovna, the first woman to hold the formal title of Tsarina of Russia. From there would begin what is recognized as the first stage of his mandate. He embarks on a broad program of reforms with the aim of reorganizing the central and local administration, and the same year he was crowned, Ivan faces a deep crisis after a large fire swept through Moscow, destroying large sectors of the city and leaving a high number of dead and homeless people. However, diligently and without major delays, the city was rebuilt under the command of Tsar Ivan. After this, a government council was created that marginalized the boyars. Ivan sought to give more power to the small nobility and merchants while creating the first permanent army of the Russian Tsardom. His initial reign was conducted in a peaceful manner. In the 1550s, he promulgated a series of reforms for the promotion of arts and letters, and also introduced a novel device known as the printing press, with the aim of printing copies of religious texts throughout Russia. The Tsar also requested the construction of several churches throughout the state, including the St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow, which was built in honor of one of his first military conquests, which we will talk about very shortly. He also convened ecclesiastical councils to strengthen church matters, reinforcing the importance of Orthodox Christianity in all aspects and state affairs, even canonizing a large number of Russian saints. Likewise, Ivan takes charge of updating and unifying a legal code for all Russian principalities and restructures the Russian armed forces in order to strengthen the nation against the constant threat of war. He is recognized for having centralized Russia's power in Moscow. After a peaceful and vigorous start to his mandate, Ivan soon successfully gathered a large number of followers. Even before coming to power, there was a strong conflict between the Russian people and the Tatar people. The Tartars was the name the Russians gave to various invading groups of Asian origin. One of the Tartar Khanates bordered Russia, and for this reason the Tsar considered it an obstacle in his aspirations to expand the territory towards the eastern region of the country. One of the Tsar's greatest campaigns would be the conquest of the Tartar Khanates. Ivan maintained the proclamation that his predecessors had made of Russia as the Third Rome and wanted to turn Moscow into the new Constantinople. So it was that in June of 1552, Ivan led a newly formed army of 100,000 men down the Volga River towards Kazan, the capital of the Tartar Khanate. By the end of August of the same year, he besieged the Tartar fortress, where he awaited their surrender. Finally, that same year, 1552, he achieved victory over the Khanate of Kazan, and in 1556, he achieved another victory over the Khanate of Astrakhan, which has been interpreted in hindsight as the Terrible, but curiously this name by which he has passed into history seems to be the result of a bad translation. A more accurate translation of Grozny has qualified this nickname more as Ivan the Awesome. His good governance in the initial stage and his successes in war showed him to the people as a good and effective leader. From these conquests, the Volga became a Russian river and the trade route to the Caspian Sea was secured for the Muscovite Empire, further expanding the margins of Russia. What could be called the Russian state of that time was larger than that governed by any other European monarch. Each Tartar Khanate conquered by the Russians, the Muslim population was replaced by Russian settlers, and mosques were replaced with Orthodox churches. Following these events, Ivan was designated by the Patriarch of Constantinople as Tsar and Orthodox sovereign of the entire Christian community, from east to west to the ocean, while the Patriarch of Alexandria had compared him to Alexander the Great. By 1553, after achieving victory in Kazan, Ivan fell ill, possibly with pneumonia. Believing he was in the last days of his life, he decided to follow his father's example and called the boyars to swear loyalty to his son Dmitri. But on this occasion, the nobles refused. The boyars did not yield to the Russian leader's request, as they feared that an infant Tsar would create a power vacuum similar to past events. To the boyars' misfortune, Ivan recovered and returned to rule Muscovy, but under an even more suspicious behavior of everyone around him. Ivan sought to consolidate power in Muscovy through reforms and territorial expansion. The first stage of his reign, characterized by the consolidation of his power in Muscovy and various reforms, was followed by years of constant turmoil. For Ivan had the goal of taking over all the trade routes of the Baltic Sea, and his attempt to seize them resulted in a conflict that would extend against Livonia for more than 20 years. Livonia was a region inhabited by the Livonian group in what would be part of Latvia and Estonia today. Although Ivan's army achieved several victories in this context, the course of the war would soon change, and the Tsar would suffer two significant events that took place in the years 1560 and 1564 that would turn his life around. The first of these was in the year 1560 when Ivan's wife suddenly died. The Tsar was convinced that Anastasia had been the victim of another suspicious case of poisoning, and although this murder could not be proven at the time, a supposed 20th century examination of the Tsarina's bones would reveal that she allegedly had high levels of mercury. From Anastasia's relationship with Ivan the Terrible, 6 children were born, although only 2 of them, Ivan and Fyodor, reached adulthood. The death of the Tsarina would deeply intensify Ivan's mistrust and exacerbate his temperamental disorders. The second event that marked Ivan's life was the betrayal by his closest friend, Duke Andrei Kursky, who chose to switch sides to the Lithuanians in 1564 during Ivan's failed attempt to conquer the Baltic territory of Livonia, which began in 1558. Duke Andrei Kursky, who serves as one of the Tsar's main military commanders, takes control of part of the army and, along with the forces of what is now Poland and Sweden, deals Russia a defeat that causes Ivan enormous fury. It convinces him more and more that the boyars were his great enemies. After the death of his wife and the betrayal of one of his best friends, a group of nobles allied with the new metropolitan bishop ask him to abdicate the throne. Tsar Ivan decides to move to Alexandrov, a town located northeast of the Russian capital, and upon settling there in 1564, he writes letters indicating his intention to resign his position due to the corruption and betrayal of the boyars. These letters were made public and caused great agitation. Though he acted like he didn't want to return to the throne, it's speculated this may have been a political strategy. This is how the noble class tried to rule the country in his absence, but the government begins to show disorder and lack of unity. Seeing the popular agitation and that the administration was not working properly without Ivan, and in the midst of a harsh war against Livonia, the boyars sent an emissary to ask him to change his mind and return to the throne. The Tsar agrees on the condition that he be granted absolute power over the life or death of the boyars and authority over the courts. At the same time, he demands that his control over the military forces be ratified, to have the legal power to confiscate the assets of those he considers traitors, and to be given exclusive control over the Russian treasury. Out of desperation, the Council of Nobles and the clergy accepted Ivan's demands, a decision they would regret almost immediately. The Tsar had not forgotten the humiliations of his childhood, much less the betrayal of the boyars and his close friend to the war, or the alleged murder of the Tsarina. Therefore, this new government would mark a new way of exercising power and of dealing with dissent. Disappointed by the course of the Livonian War and seeking a new political arrangement for the situation, the Tsar returns to Moscow in February of 1565 and sets out to divide the country into two administrative areas, Oprichnina and Semshina. The first would be governed by Ivan in the way he deemed appropriate with absolute power, while the second would remain unchanged and would be led by the noble class. Oprichnina was mainly located north of Muscovy. The boyar landowners of these lands were evicted and many of them became refugees, while others were executed. To oversee his new territory, Ivan created the first form of secret police in Russia, the Oprichniki. They dressed entirely in black and were the personal and state police guard of the Tsar, undertaking a first campaign of repression, persecution, and neutralization of anyone suspected of conspiring. It is believed that their force grew from 1,000 to 6,000 men between the years 65 and 1572. During this period, Ivan also created the Oprichniki Palace in Moscow, where mistreatment, abuses, and homicides became common acts. According to historical legends and alleged documents, at least 20 people were daily victims of very bad treatment to death, while Ivan watched them laughing and contemplating the facts. The arbitrary and bloody use of the Oprichnik against the boyars and the people caused thousands of victims for 8 years. At this moment, the nickname of Ivan the Terrible becomes even more popular. One of the many reprisals applied was to punish with the death penalty a prince who had accused him of having participated in an orgy with only men. Among the execution methods of the Oprichniki would be boiling people while they were alive, impaling them, roasting them over open fire, or tearing their limbs using horses. His extreme distrust meant that they were in a constant state of alert against the boyars or external threats. So it was that in 1570, he and his army invaded the city of Novgorod, a region of Russia that the Tsar, supposedly based on documents that had reached him, believed they were planning to ally with Lithuania against him in the war. Ivan's Oprichniki invade the city, completely destroy it, end the lives of thousands of its inhabitants, and publicly execute the boyars. In this way, the Oprichniki became a formidable and feared force throughout the empire, a new type of police force for the consolidation of power. By May of 1571, Ivan had almost 25 years in power. The Tatar army at that time attacks Moscow, but the Oprichniki failed to repel the invasion, making Ivan even begin to suspect them. After finding the city defenseless, the Crimean Tatars burned the surroundings of Moscow and caused an estimated 60,000 deaths. That same year, the Tsar dissolves all the armed forces, executes many leaders for failing to defend Moscow, and suspects several of conspiring against him. On the other hand, Oprichnina, the administrative region under his command, is dissolved in 1572 to reorganize the territory. The Tsar would not stand for this Tatar attack and was preparing a counteroffensive. In fact, Ivan visits England and takes refuge there during the worst moments of the invasion. One tea is then that he proposes marriage to Queen Elizabeth I of England, but she rejects him. Ivan returns to Russia, reorganizes his forces, and the Tsar's troops set out again. And after a battle with the Tatars fought that same year, they deal a crushing defeat to Crimea, finally forcing the Tatars to give up their attempt to expand and conquer Russian territory. During the following years, the personal instability of the Tsar grows to such an extent that it leads him to commit one of the most psychopathological acts remembered from his reign. In 1581, upon seeing his eldest son's pregnant wife dressed in a way he considered immodest, he violently attacks her. She was not just any son's wife, but the wife of his eldest son and heir to the throne. After severely beating her, the woman has a miscarriage, leading to a heated confrontation between Ivan and his son. In the midst of frustration, the Tsar strikes his son directly in the temple with a staff, inflicting such severe trauma that it causes his death a few days later. This left his younger son Theodore as heir to the throne. However, Theodore was not politically fit and also left no new inheritance for his throne, which would end the long dynasty that Ivan the Terrible had preceded, starting a new tumultuous period that would eventually end with the establishment of the Romanov dynasty. Returning to the last stage of Ivan's reign, after long years of war and without achieving a definitive triumph, the Tsar ends the war against Livonia in 1583, after Russia, through a truce, was forced to cede cities in the Gulf of Finland. However, Ivan continues with his expansionist aspirations and orders the departure of his troops with one of his best generals to the east, with the aim of conquering the various towns of the very large and diverse region of Siberia. The troops set out and town by town managed to annex that vast territory full of resources. The conquest of Siberia would be one of Ivan's greatest legacies for the future of the Russian state. After nearly 40 years of reign, Ivan IV spends his last years plagued by physical weakness and almost unable to move. His health deteriorates greatly until he finally dies in his bed in March of 1584 in Moscow after suffering a stroke. It's not clear how much is legend and how much is truth in the image of Ivan the Terrible. For a long time, his reign was characterized by good administration and victories and conquests in war. However, the levels of violence that his kingdom reached after the death of his wife and the betrayal of his best friend gave him a gloomy memory for history. Historians attribute his actions to a deep mental pathology, while others considered that they were not much different from those of any autocrat in his quest to consolidate power. The truth is that his extreme distrust served him not to be overthrown and continue his expansionist conquests of the still vast Russian nation, which still owes its current territorial possessions to several of these old monarchs. This is Reynaldo Carrillo speaking. This is the New Encyclopedia, and thank you all for sharing our videos, for leaving your comments, for following us on our Instagram, and for collaborating with us on the Patreon that you can get under this video. Until next time, and God bless you.